Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Got a Case of Wanderlust podcast. I'm your host Lydia, and Karen and I are back with part 2 of our conversation from last episode, where we discussed Karen's experience growing up in Nigeria, living abroad in Ukraine, Germany, and now Portugal. And today we're continuing our discussion about our hot travel takes today. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, Karen. I'm really so grateful for your unfiltered honesty last conversation, and I'm so excited to dive back in where we left off.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here for the second time, and thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun sharing my experience, and talking about stuff that matter with you. So I'm excited to dive into another deep topic today.
Oh my gosh, me too. We have so much to talk about too.
A
I'm very
lot.
excited. So, today we're focusing more on the complex layers of the dark side of travel, things that aren't talked about as much, including things like colonialism and racism. And just like a little disclaimer, Karen and I are not experts on this topic. Our intention isn't to school, quote unquote, anyone or blame or shame, but rather just start a dialogue about topics that I feel aren't talked about enough. So, with that said, I feel like a good point to start off with is a point you made in your previous episode about your experience living abroad in a few different European countries and experiencing explicit conscious racism for the first time. So, you said that in Portugal you still experience racism, but in a more indirect, implicit way. So, can you share more
Yeah.
about what you meant by that?
Okay, in Portugal, it's a lot of microaggressions, I'm going to be honest. One that comes to mind immediately is the fact that I speak Portuguese. I learned Portuguese when I came here. I'm not a native Portuguese speaker, right? And for some background, I learned Portuguese, but then as the time passed, because I hung out a lot with Brazilians, and my closest friends here are Brazilians, I adapted to the Brazilian accent as well. So my accent is a bit all over the place, right? And whenever I speak to someone in Portugal in Portuguese, this mostly happens with other people, but then they ask where I'm from, and I'm like, I'm Nigerian, Portuguese is my first language. And the first response that I always get is, oh, I thought you were from X African country.
Mm.
And that's the funny thing. If they mentioned one African country every time, I'd be like, oh my God, maybe I do have that African accent. But it's different African countries every single time, each time. And it varies. They're like, oh, I thought you were from Guinea-Bissau. I thought you were from Mozambique. I thought you were from Angola. I thought you were from Cabo Verde. I'm like, I have not had contact with half of these countries. Like, I've not had contact with people from half of these countries. I don't even know what they sound like, right? And you're telling me that I sound like that simply for the fact that I'm African and I'm black, and you hear me speak Portuguese and you presume that I'm not from Portugal. That to me is like very ridiculous. And it's not just the older people, the younger people as well. I've gotten those comments a bit. And my sister as well, Michelle, she has also gotten those comments a lot. So it says to me that this is not just a me thing, it's how they perceive Africans, and it's one thing if it's a situation of um so what I'm saying is basically if it's that I had those if it's I had that specific accent, that's one thing, right? However, they look at me and they presume that I don't have any other um like they presume I have one specific I'm from one specific country, I have one specific ethnicity, in which it's something that does not apply to me at all. And this, in my opinion, is a form of micro racism here.
Hmm. Can you define microaggression or microracism for people that aren't aware?
So I think the Oxford definition of microracism is not something that I'm aware of, and I think it depends a lot from people to people. But in my opinion and in my experience, microracism, microaggressions is when people don't, they're not outright, they're not blatant with their racism. Like they would not shame you for being a certain race or from a certain culture. Instead, it's just you hear notes of it in the way they address you, in the way they speak to you, be it them presuming you're from one random country. Like, I don't know if this happens to you, Lydia, or if people ask
It
you,
does.
oh, are you from Japan or from Korea or so,
But
or
where are
from
you
something.
really from?
Yeah. But it's like it's people presuming things about where you're from. It's about when you say you're from a certain, in my opinion, when you say you're from a certain educational background, because I'm a university student, right? I'm a medical student, which is quite high in terms of education. When I tell this to people and they're shocked, not shocked as in, oh my God, med school is so hard, but shocked as in, you are in med school. Microaggression, microracism also can come in the form of when I'm out with my afro and people come up to me telling me that I'm so brave and that I look like a queen in my afro. It's one thing if it's complimentary, I can understand when it's a compliment and I feel really happy and really excited because I love my afro. And when people love my afro with me, we're sharing the joy of afro, the afro joy. But when they come up to me and they say it as a form of bravery and they refer to me as a queen, an African queen, I'm like, that has some prejudice linked in. That there's a bit of prejudice linked in. So those are just a few examples of microaggressions or microracism. And it can be, I feel like there's levels to it as well. In Ukraine, we had a lot of micro racism. Even here, we have a bit of micro racism in sense of people, as in house owners, not wanting to rent their houses to Black people or to Brazilians or to Indians or to people of color here in Portugal. That is a more severe and more blatant form of microaggression, but it's still micro in the sense that they won't give you a reason why. They will corner around it, they will slither around it. And it's something that you wouldn't notice at first. You think, oh, it's just one time, like maybe I made a mistake in my application or whatever. But after it happens repeatedly, you start to notice a pattern. And it's these little patterns, these little microaggressions that bundle up, they snowball and become one huge thing of racism. Because in its core, what is microaggressions? What is microracism? It's racism, just not blatant and not obvious. So for me, that's my definition of microaggressions or microracism.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your take and your experiences. I think for me, I agree with your definition as well. At the end of the day, any form of racism, whether it's explicit or implicit, it's still racism. You're still discriminating based off a person's appearance. And assuming is never okay. Like,
Exactly.
it doesn't matter if your intentions are like malicious or not. Maybe it's just out of a place of ignorance, but that still doesn't excuse the fact that you said something that could be hurtful to someone else.
Exactly.
And yeah, I think because there's different levels, because some forms are less easy to notice because it's not super direct, like you're not saying something blatantly offensive like you said, like it can be hard to detect even within yourself. So I'm curious, like how do you think racism like starts and then we'll talk about how it manifests in the travel industry.
Okay, how do I think racism starts? You mean in sense of going back to pre-colonialism or post-colonialism,
Um,
or you mean in a person, in an
yeah,
individual?
in an individual, let's talk about that.
Okay. So how I think racism starts in an individual also goes back to culture and to society, and I feel like a lot of people, not a lot of people, everyone, we're all victims to our society, right? We're all victims to the system, and we're all victims to the mindsets of people that have come before us. And lots of people's parents would teach them that, oh, black people are inferior, or oh, black people are dirty, or they're here to ruin your property in terms of like renting and stuff. But 100% it depends on the individual to realize that okay, this is wrong, and or this might not be true, and then to try and take a change. But it's not just in what the parents teach them, it's not just in what their peers tell them, it's also in how history is taught to them as well. In a lot of colonizers' lands, I'm going to use Portugal as the main example because that's where I stay right now. And I've had talks with Portuguese people, and they have, shared to me how they were taught in schools and how their parents taught them and stuff. But in schools here in Portugal, the kids are taught that the Portuguese people discovered Brazil, and before they went to Brazil, the Brazilians were just what is the exact word they use? They were like the Brazilians. They were just sort of like savages. They didn't. They were not clothed. They didn't have any infrastructure, no architecture, nothing. and they were just living their lives like plucking fruit from the tree. Basically, treated them as barbarians, treated them like animals, like lower, lesser beings, right? And they were taught that the Portuguese people went to Brazil and went to save them, to help them, to make them better. And so the Portuguese people, in their history, in their colonization history, they're painted as the good guys. They're painted as people that went to help another group of people. And so these kids, they grow up continuously with this mindset, and they continue to think, oh, we help the Brazilians. The Brazilians are lesser than us, because that's the thing. I think there's a huge difference between empathizing with someone and pitying them, because pity comes from a place rooted in superiorism. If you pity someone, you automatically believe that they are inferior to you, and this is what the Portuguese people think as well, or what white people, what the previous colonizers think as well too, about the African kids, for example. Like when they say that there's no water in Africa, or that the African kids are suffering, they're hungry, they are malnourished. And 100% there is some truth to that. There is a lot of poverty in Africa and Nigeria specifically. And that's something that we need to work on, that I think we could do better in. However, I see these faults, I see these people suffering, and I'm like, these are my people suffering, like these are my humans, they're normal humans, and they're suffering, and something needs to be done about it 100%. But then I feel like other people would look at them and be like, oh, these little beings are suffering. And then it's like when you see a dog that has a broken leg or something. And at some point, I even feel as though the white people treat ethnic people, or POC, people of color, as though they are worse than animals. Like they treat us as worse than animals. They have much more empathy for animals than they do for people of color. And that for me is an absolutely wild concept, something that I think is absolutely revolting and strange to its core, So people, returning back to your question of how racism comes in people, I think people are planted a little seed of racism since they were kids, since they are young. Not just white people, us as well, people of color, were planted a little seed of racism to ourselves, a sort of prejudice to ourselves. And it's up to the individual how they're going to deal with that, whether they choose to water and care for that racism seed by consuming more racist content and believing in the racist propaganda, or whether they open their eyes and uproot that little sprout when it's still a sprout. But then I feel like at some point, when someone grows up and they've already been living as a racist for a while, I think it's kind of impossible to get rid of that racism, because now it's a tree, it's an oak tree. That little sprout, that little seed is now an oak tree. And it's not very easy to bulldoze down an oak tree. They have deep rooted beliefs in how they perceive people of color, and it's difficult to change. So I think where racism started is not a thing of where it started, because I think it starts within all of us. It starts from our ancestors, it starts from long before us. And it's more of how it grows and how we wish to deal with that growth of racism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You brought up so many good points. And the first one, I definitely 100% agree with you that racism is learned from, unfortunately, a very young age. I mean, we're not born racist, of course, but it's all about like the environment you were raised in, who you're surrounded with, what messages you're told exactly, like your education plays such a huge role in terms of how history is told, and history itself, like the history of colonization and the history of power dynamics, how colonization really shaped that, affecting us today. And we'll talk about how that gets revealed in the travel industry. But I also want to ask, like, how much of that is actually Africa's responsibility, like African countries to solve, or like because they have these like issues that you mentioned, like how much of that is the colonizers' responsibility, or like because a lot of these problems were caused by like the colonizing countries.
I think this is a very interesting question, and it's one that I've actually been simmering on for a while, because a while back, or not a while back, a bit back, I used to blame all of I'm going to use Nigeria here because that's the country that I know. It's my country. I can't speak for all African countries. but I think it also probably does apply to a lot of African countries that were previously under colonizer rule. But Nigeria, I used to a bit ago, I used to think all Nigerians' problems are caused by the colonizers and it's their duty to fix everything that's wrong with us and blah blah blah. But I'm starting to realize that they're not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything to try and fix the problems that they themselves have caused. So, because that's the thing that the British have caused so many problems within Nigeria in itself that for us to start to try and fix these problems, it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of digging, because these problems are not just superficial ones; they're very very deep, and even I don't know where it begins from. I don't know where it's rooted from. Obviously it's rooted from colonization, but I don't know where to even start, right? Because ways that the British still affect Nigeria up until this day, and not just talking of colonization, because colonization is something that has happened, and people believe that it's a thing of the past, that it no longer affects our present or our future, and I think this is completely wrong. I think there is still no. I think, as a fact, Nigeria is unfortunately low key still under British rule, in the sense that a president that was elected before our current president, and his election was an election that was not it was not true to its form. It was not a fair election at all. There were some imputes from outer sources. Trump, um, but there was some interference from the white man, and not just the United States, because we do know that Trump had a thing to do in that election, but also the British. And all those little factors caused that president, a shitty one, for context, a shitty president. All those factors caused the shitty president to be elected. And of course, they wanted him to be elected because what he stood for were things that the previous colonizers would benefit from, were things that the West would benefit from. Because Nigeria is in a situation where we have a lot of raw materials, we have a lot of oil, a lot of crude oil. However, what we do is we export that crude oil at basically like dirt cheap. We export crude oil at dirt cheap, and we import it again for a really really spiked price. And that president, obviously, that was not something that he found he wanted to stop. It was something that he was also benefiting from as a spoiled politician, right? So the outside forces also helped in electing him, so they could benefit, and then of course Nigeria was suffering through all of this. So where am I trying to get to is that I don't expect anything from the previous colonizers anymore. I don't expect them to do anything for us. I think they are so big-headed and they are so selfish, and apart from the amount of shit that they have done to Nigeria and like half of the damn African countries, they themselves are going through a lot of problems that they don't even know how to fix. So for me right now, I don't expect anything from them. I don't want them to do anything. What I want them to do is to leave us alone. I just really, really want them to leave us alone. If they leave us alone, then at least we can try and start to find our own solutions, or try and start to think for ourselves, because as it is, we are not thinking for ourselves, we are thinking for them, we are thinking in the manner that they have like implanted in us. So I see no progress in the near future unless the Brits and unless the Westerners just leave us alone. And I think it's the same for a lot of African countries. So I do think that the colonizers should have some responsibility to try and make things better or make things right for the countries that they had harmed, but I don't expect that from them. The bare minimum they could do is leave us alone. Let us be, you know.
So you remind me a lot of the white savior complex, also just known as the savior complex, which is like basically a psychological phenomenon, but could deeply apply to many other situations outside of just interactions with each other. Um, Specifically colonization, in that your take is that you're specifically like asking no, like the outside help, like to stop intervening. And that is exactly the opposite of what the white savior complex does, which is basically when outsiders, doesn't have to be white, just anyone with more privileges, imposing themselves onto those with less privileges, without their consent. So basically, thinking someone needs your help, but they really don't. They really just want you to stay out of it. And this comes from just the other person with more privilege thinking they know better. Again, racist thinking. But yeah, let's talk about voluntourism. So voluntourism is basically when organizations marketing themselves as, like nonprofit, trying to help, uh, quote unquote developing, or like, what's the new term, the global south countries, um, like trying to send people from global north countries into global south countries, and trying to like help out in various issues such as environmental, social, health. And the reason it's called voluntourism is because these programs are paid for. So you're paying these organizations for you to travel into these communities and help out and volunteer. You're not actually like going directly to the community in the country and like asking them if they need help, but rather you're going to an organization that's like sponsoring you to go to these countries instead. So, what are your thoughts on this?
I think, first of all, amazing like definition, amazing explanation of what it is. I think it really cleared up for the people that are listening. But diving into it, I think it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. I'm absolutely shocked and appalled by how common this is and how the people that partake in it and people that see this don't realize how fucked up it truly is, honestly, because I'm gonna start by saying that if you're going to a country to volunteer and to help the people of that country, ask yourself, what are you going there to do? Genuinely ask yourself, what exactly are you going to that country to do? What plans do you have to help these people? What has the organization that you've registered for? What do they actually want to do to help these people? Because there's lots of cases where I'll give an example later on. But then going back, I think there really is a lot of ways that volunteering in a globally South country could help and truly is amazing because if it comes from a good place, if it comes from a good heart, and if it has good intentions, it could be amazing. It could really help these people, right? Because I'm in med school, as I've mentioned like 5 million times. And then in med school, there's a bunch of programs where you can go to a different country, mainly globally South countries, right? You can go to some African countries or in Latin America to volunteer and help with the healthcare, like help with changing wounds of people that need it, help spreading like information or teaching people about how vaccinations are important, or helping take care of sick people, or helping even in the hospitals where they need an extra hand or two. I think those are amazing. I think those are things that could actually contribute to a country and could actually contribute to the well-being and the welfare of the people that you're quote unquote helping. Right. However, I think the problem is that lots of these organizations and lots of people as well, they have this idea of I'm gonna go to Africa, I'm gonna go to Latin America, and I'm gonna help the kids. And then you ask them, in what sense are you helping the kids? I'm gonna give that example that I wanted to give. So I wanted to read before I applied to this university that I'm currently in. I applied to a university in Lisbon, a private medical university, where the kids are obviously on a different brainwave, I feel. Don't get me wrong, there's a bunch of nice people there. However, it's a thing of privilege, and I think a lot of them don't realize their privilege. Circling back, so there was this girl that I met, and she asked me, because I was my sister, she asked Michelle and I, oh, where are you guys from? We were responding, we're from Nigeria. And then she asked, do you speak Swahili? And confusion, first of all, huge confusion, because one, No, we don't speak Swahili. We're speaking English to you. That's our first language. We speak English, sweetheart. Two, it was obvious that she asked us where we were from simply to bring up asking if we spoke Swahili, right? And in our confusion, we were like, no, nice try, I guess, A for effort, but we don't speak Swahili. Like, because, okay, I could give her benefit of the doubt. Swahili is one of the most spoken African languages in Africa. However, no. And so we asked, and we said, no, we don't speak Swahili. English is actually our first language. But why? And then she responded with, oh, I speak Swahili. And at that point, I was excited. I was like, oh, that's nice. Like, she speaks an African language. Why did she learn the African language? That's so interesting, so curious. And then I asked her, I said, well, that's really cool. Why do you speak Swahili? And she said, oh, I went volunteering in Tanzania. Pause. Volunteering in Tanzania. Okay, I can accept that. I'm gonna ask, what city did you go to in Tanzania? Where exactly did you go to, and what did you do in the volunteering? At that point, I didn't ask to judge her. I asked genuinely out of curiosity because she's entering med school, so I believe that she had something good to contribute
She has
to
the
the community.
qualifications.
Exactly. And she responded, oh, I don't know the name of the city. First of all, huge red flag. What do you mean? What do you mean you went to volunteer somewhere and you don't know the name of the place you volunteered in? That is that's bullshit. And I was like, okay, but what did you do there? She's like, yeah, because Tanzania is an undeveloped country. Undeveloped country. I went there to volunteer and to help the kids. At that time, I blame my ignorance for this because I didn't know what Tanzania was like. Else I would have combated her because I was like, okay, maybe it genuinely is an undeveloped country. And to those of you that are listening, take a break, pause this for a second, Google Tanzania, and tell me where the undeveloped is. Tell me, Lydia, you Google Tanzania and tell me where the undeveloped is, right?
I see resorts, I see skyscrapers, I see buildings in a city. Like,
Oh,
I don't
she's
know
like, oh, I
what
went
she meant.
volunteering to help the kids. She's like, I went volunteering to help the kids. I was like, okay, what did you do with the kids? She's like, oh, I played with the kids. Girl,
She played with
you
them.
went to a country, to a place that you don't know the name of. You claim that you went to volunteer to help the people out, to help the kids out. And I asked you, what did you do exactly to help the kids? And you tell me that you stayed with them and you played with them. Are you Jesus? Do you think you are Jesus? Your presence alone is enough to make these kids smile with joy. Like they are so happy to be welcomed within your space. They're receiving divine air just from your presence. Like your sweat is giving them water, is cleansing them. What does she think she is? Who does she think she is? And I think for me, the fact that this is something that I witnessed in real life, this is prime example of white savior complex. Prime example of white savior complex. She went there not knowing what she was actually going to do there. She doesn't even know where she was going to. They took her to the nooks and crannies, to the village, to one random village in Tanzania that she doesn't even know the name of, right? She saw only that, did not do any further research, and came to the conclusion that Tanzania is an underdeveloped country. The whole country is an underdeveloped country. And then she's telling me that she speaks Swahili because she went to speak to the children. Speak the damn Swahili for me.
Right.
Speak it. She does not know 2 words. Absolutely ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous behavior. This is prime white savior complex. And so I implore you, if you're going to volunteer in a place, it doesn't matter if you're white or not, just you as someone that has the capabilities to volunteer. Because if you have the capabilities to volunteer, it means you are privileged. And that is a fact. So you as a privileged person, and you're going to volunteer to a place, I truly do implore you, do some research on the place that you're going to. Do some research on the organization that you are registering in. And chances are, if you are going to pay 10,000 euros, I promise you it is not a probably beneficial organization. Do some research, because there's some good organizations that really exist. There's some good ones that ask the people in those countries or in those places for consent and genuinely seek to make a change, seek to help people. There's good ones, they exist. It's just that the ones that are mostly popular, the ones that you see the most, are the ones full of bullshit to truly just help the egos of white people. And that's something that you really do need to be careful for. And the fact that this is something that a girl had the audacity to tell me to my face. And then I went to her Instagram. What was her Instagram? The first post that was pinned, a picture of her with the African kids smiling. Oh my
Mm,
God, thank you, Jesus. You're amazing. You're amazing. But yeah,
mm.
guys, please educate yourselves and do better, because I think as a community, as people, we all could do better. We could.
Whew. Yeah, that story. Wow. I really hope whoever's listening like finds that as problematic as we do, just because there's so many layers of problems going on. I mean, for one, you're exactly right. You're paying so much money to travel to this country. Where's the money going? Like, it's not going to the country you're supposed to be helping. It's going to the organization most of the time. Again, there are some good organizations, that's why you have to do your research, but most organizations are using that money for the benefit of the organization. As well, so many projects are not actually helping the community. It's like your story, like what was she actually doing? Like playing with the kids. Is there no one else in the community that could play with the kids besides someone from a different country? Like they need people from different countries really to play with the kids. Mm.
Suspicious.
Like I really do agree with you that volunteering is a privileged thing. For one, like if you have the freedom of time, that is a privilege. If you have the freedom to go somewhere and not make an income because you already have an income, like income from a higher income country, like that is a privilege. And three, you're going to like volunteer and like how much of an impact are you actually making? That's the question that you really have to ask yourself is one, am I doing a job that can't be done by the locals? And two, like, is it actually like welcomed by the community themselves? Are they actually asking for outside aid? And if not, that is definitely an example of white savior complex because again, you're assuming they need help when they really don't. And I'm gonna write a whole like article about like other examples and ways you could do voluntourism or just like volunteering abroad more ethically, not even voluntourism if you don't want to call it that. But yeah, thank you for sharing that story. I think that's like a really good example. And just how this relates to colonialism, if you guys are still like a bit confused why we keep like throwing this word around. So, colonialism is basically defined as when countries or another territory takes control of another territory or their resources or their people. And like historically, this has happened with a lot of European countries, you know, taking over the Americas, taking over Africa without the native people's consents, with the sole desire of like political or economic control for their own sake, for selfish reasons. And colonialism, in the historical sense, is still happening today. But on modern day colonialism, a form called neocolonialism, is when, again, a foreign entity is imposing themselves on another entity, again, without permission, without consent, but it doesn't actually have to be territory in the historical sense, but rather just any form of control, whether that is through tourism, whether that's again taking over like a certain part of the economy, like that is still colonialism, even if it's not, you know, taking over the country in itself. So the reason this relates to voluntourism is because again, you're asserting control, you're asserting dominance over a territory, a people, a culture that is not yours and that they're not asking for. So just wanted to clarify that. And so again, going back to biases, this all relates to racism and how we think of some people as less than, whether that's conscious or unconscious. And so I'm wondering if you have any takes on like the following problems or like effects of unchecked biases, which leads to unequal power dynamics, which is cultural appropriation, exoticism, or fetishization.
Oof. Oof. Okay.
Ooh.
Those are three. You started with culture appropriation. I was like, oof. And then you went to like fetishization. I was like, oof. Okay. But man, do I have something to say? First of all, I think culture appropriation is something that's very, very it varies a lot. It's very subjective to not just the culture, but to an individual. I'm going to give you an example. I, as well as a bunch of other Africans, we don't have problems with white people or non-black people doing braids, because for us, it's like you're trying to like immerse yourself in something that's our culture, and we find it beautiful. Is it great for your hair? Of course not. But you're having fun. Like we're here for a good time, not a long time in it. So people bleach their hair, dye their hair all the time. Like it's bad for your hair, but you enjoy the way you look, you love the way you look, and that's nice. However, I think for a lot of Black Americans, um, white people, non-black people doing braids is something that they find revolting, is something that they don't agree with at all. And like I said, this is the difference in culture, because Africans, we were never in a position where we felt like white people were trying to steal our culture, that specific culture, right? So for us, we don't have that certain trauma response of you're doing my hair, you're going to try and steal my hair, or you're going to try and call it a different name, because that's something that I found out that the Americans do a lot, is that they see something from a different culture, from an ethnic group, and they take it and they call it a different name, as though they colonized the whole thing again. So I think I think the Americans, the Black Americans, have that fear because that's the background that they had. However, for us Africans, it's something that we just see as a form of appreciation and not cultural appropriation. The same thing goes for wearing our traditional attire. If I see someone in my traditional attire, I'm like, that's nice. You look good. Like you know what that's the thing. I think it's really important because you need to do your research on what it is that you are doing and where it came from in order to make sure that you're not making the same mistakes as your ancestors, in order to make sure that you're not making the same conscious mistake. Because that's the thing. You think you're making a mistake and you say, "Oh, I was ignorant. I didn't know." Ignorance is not a problem. However, being ignorant and enjoying your ignorance, as in basking in your ignorance and not trying to educate yourself, that is a problem. That is where the problem starts from, because everyone is ignorant about one thing or the other. However, it's a thing of another thing of being ignorant means you're privileged. It means you don't have to know about these things. Like being ignorant of racism, being ignorant of cultural appropriation, that's privilege. Because you've lived in a world where you've never had to face these things, so you never had to know these things. So the least you could do is educate yourself. Educate yourself for the people that you might affect with the people that you might harm with your actions. So learn what braids are, learn where braids come from, learn what you're going to do to your hair, like the effects of it, learn the different types of braids, just learn something. And you might think, oh, this is a lot of work just for a hairstyle. It's a lot of work to not have your culture stolen. It is a lot of work, but it's worth it in the end of the day, isn't it? So yeah, I think cultural appropriation depends a lot based on culture, on individuals, and based on the society that you're in. But I think as long as you're doing something with the current education, as long as you're doing something with the proper knowledge and paying your respects to the people that had created that culture, you cannot really go wrong. And one thing is, if someone from that culture says, I feel uncomfortable you doing this, don't do it. It's as simple as that. Don't argue. Just don't do it. It's not that serious, you know. And I think this like varies a lot with white people and stuff. But then even I myself, I've been really, really obsessed with Indian outfits and their culture and their jewelry. I'm a jewelry fanatic. I see the Indian outfits, their culture, and the jewelry, and I'm like, I love that. I really do love that. So what did I do? I educated myself and I found out that the Indians say that it's okay to use their jewelry as long as I know where the jewelry is coming from and the history behind the jewelry. But we should avoid bindis because bindis is a more religious thing. So I'm like, okay, Gucci, I can get the jewelry, but I don't need to do. And it's that simple. I don't know why people get so hurt over it. It's that simple. They don't want you doing the bindis, and they have a reason for you to not do the bindis, even if they didn't, okay? It's that simple. You avoid it. You just educate yourself and you learn. So I think for me, that is my opinion on culture appropriation. I think it definitely does go a lot deeper than that, but that is what it is in its core. And I think I've given people ways to avoid cultural appropriation because it really is that simple.
It's
Ask for
just
permission,
respecting.
educate
Yeah.
yourself. If you get a no, it's a no. It's a no, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It's as much educating as much as it is respecting, like after you've learned.
Exactly.
And so that's like kind of the purpose of this podcast, hopefully to like promote this kind of education and awareness. Um, and then leading to like the second topic, which is like exotifying or fetishizing a culture slash a certain cultural practice. Do you have any like examples of how you've experienced this yourself or just how you witnessed it in the world?
I think experience I do have, I fear. It's the same example of my afro. Whenever I'm out with my afro, they're like, oh my God, African queen, like you look so
Mm.
exotic and blah, 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 blah. And that is so very clear, like exoticizing me or fetishizing black culture. And in Ukraine, I had this one guy that came up to me and he was like, oh, could I get your number? I'm like, no. He's like, oh, but I really love black women. Like, black women are amazing. And blah, 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 blah. Going on a whole rant about how much he loved black women. Sweetheart, that is not love. That is fetishizing. You are fetishizing black women. It's as simple as that. And I get it a lot. Like, even my friends would go around. Like I had a friend that said that she had ninth vision because she only sees black guys. I give her 10 out of 10 for creativity. That was very funny. That was very funny. However, the deep root of it is fetishization because it's one thing if you find black people handsome or beautiful because we're amazing people. But then it's another thing if you say you as someone that's not from that culture. Because one thing is wanting to date someone from your culture, it's easier. I get it. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just date a Nigerian because it's easier, right? But then one thing is you being from a different culture, from a different race, or from a different background, and you chasing after only people from a specific race. That is huge fetishization. I think that's something that is happening a lot right now with East Asians. They are huge victims right now of the fetishizing culture. And I find it absolutely ridiculous. And I don't understand how people don't realize that this is what they're doing.
It's
Like, it's,
racist. Again, you're like
what
excluding
is
races
this?
based off the color of their skin.
Yeah, but I think in this sense of fetishization, maybe you might have something to say in this case.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely why I wanted to talk about it in this episode. I mean, okay, so both examples, again, going back to why are we talking about this on the episode about colonization, neocolonization? Because for one, cultural appropriation is taking something that is not yours. It's not giving credit to the original people. And again, it's taking advantage of your privilege at the expense of other people's lack of privilege. And the second one, why is fetishization a form of neocolonialism? Again, maybe it's not as extreme as saying you're a colonizer, but it is rooted in racism. Because again, you are minimizing an entire group of people and diminishing them to a certain set of your like whatever stereotype you have about based off your biases, your own beliefs about this group of people, and you're not really seeing the people within this group as individuals, but rather as a collective group in itself. And that's racist. Like there's no getting around that. And so yeah, from my personal experience, yeah, like ethnically I'm Chinese and I experienced this a lot with like you said, like well not you didn't say it, but I think you meant it, like men, like men basically fetishizing East Asian women. And yeah, it's like really weird. Sometimes I could just like feel if a man is taking interest in me just because I'm Asian. And the way I know this is one red flag, again, like asking where I'm from, where are my origins. They won't and not them not accepting the answer, I'm from the United States. If that's not an acceptable answer for them, again, red like okay, like red flag. And two, like asking if I speak Chinese, if I know a different language, and like really like asking me about like China even though I just told them I'm like I was raised in the United States and like really taking an interest in like my other background. Um, and I'd say another red flag is if they've had other relationships, like past romantic relationships with other Asian women. And, you know, I only see this if it's like an online kind of interaction on their social media or like recently I've been on the dating apps. um, yeah, so anyway, yeah, that's kind of my experience with men specifically. Um, and I guess as a whole, like society is becoming more interested in East Asian cultures, especially Korean. I mean, Japan has been around for a while, the interest in Japanese culture, but I think we're all guilty of like romanticizing a certain culture that we would like to go to, that we think is cool, different than ours. And I think inherently there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's really good to take interest in other cultures, but like you said, it's if you're like exclusively kind of obsessed with like that like whole world, maybe at the expense of other cultures, or just completely ignoring like the different nuances of that culture. You're kind of putting it on a pedestal. And yeah, at the end of the day, that is fetishization, that's exoticism, that's making something of it's making something out of like nothing basically. Like you're kind of projecting your own assumptions or biases onto something.
100%. Yeah, I do agree with you. And I think it must be frustrating living in a world, especially in the United States, because it's one thing if people ask where I'm from and they don't expect me to say that I'm Portuguese, because Portugal does not have black Portuguese people. However, the United States, come on, like, come on, you know. You say you're from the US, they hear the way you speak, they see you in your natural habitats, and then they're like, no, but where are you actually from? That must be really frustrating because, you, like, of course, you appear Chinese because that is your ethnicity, that is your race. However, when you say, oh, I grew up in the US, and then they ask you questions about China, how are you supposed to know? You know, like what you know is stuff that they can find out by research, by Google. And them having these expectations from you, it is heavily rooted in fetishization, and fetishization itself is a product of racism. And some people think, no, but I love them. Like, I think they're so pretty. I think they're amazing. That means I'm worshiping them. No, that means you're grouping people into like individuals, you're grouping them into a collective and ignoring the fact that they are human beings and going on with your own assumptions or with your own perception of what you think they look like. And that itself is rooted in prejudice and is rooted in stigma because you're removing the humanity from these people. You're removing that and you're making them as some sort of dolls, as some sort of object for your own fantasy. And this doesn't only apply to men, it applies to women as well. I think right now there's a lot of women that are fetishizing East Asian men, specifically Korean men. I think that's like the focus right now. And I think women think, oh, but if it's a woman doing it, if it's me that's doing it, then it's fine. It's not. It's still the same feminist, you know, it's still under the same category. And again, you don't have to be, just like for some people, if the people that are listening, in case they have doubts, you don't have to be white to participate in fetishization. You don't have to be a man to participate in fetishization. Everyone of all skin colors, all race, all genders, you can be non-binary. You can be a non-binary black person and you can still participate in fetishization, guys. It's not limited for anyone. I might be fetishizing people right. I'm not. I might be fetishizing people right now. Okay. So it's not a white, straight, cis man thing. It's an everyone thing. And I think we all need to be more aware of it because if it doesn't pass through your mind, you won't realize what you're doing. And unknowingly, you're causing harm to a community. And unknowingly, you're causing harm to the individuals that you have around you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Let's call ourselves out on like our biases because we all have them. Like biases are an inherently human thing. Like again, disclaimer, like we're not perfect human beings. We're not free from biases. We're not
Yeah.
free from perceiving the world through our own lens, which is what biases are. I mean, I myself definitely had a phase where I loved Korean culture and definitely had like a fetishizing phase with Koreans just because I love BTS. Like during
Yeah.
2020, that was like what I was listening to, is what I was watching. Like definitely an army. That's what their fan group
I
is called.
yeah. I was also honestly I also participated in fetishization for a while myself, like especially with again Korean people and also Japanese people, because I went for a while. It wasn't for me. It wasn't necessarily fetishizing people. It was more of the culture itself. Like I looked at it as
Mm-hmm.
supreme. Like, oh, these people can do no harm. They are amazing.
Mm.
Blah blah blah. Blah. However, this is something that I'm recently recovering from. I'm recovering from fetishization, guys.
We love the
But
honesty.
yeah. I'm recovering and I'm more aware of when I mess up. Because sometimes I still do mess up. Sometimes I find myself slipping and thinking these prejudiced thoughts sometimes. Prejudice in the sense that, like uplifting them, making
Mm.
them
Mm-hmm.
as some sort of gods. And when I find myself thinking that, what I do is, and a task that I implore you guys to do as well, write down exactly what it is that you find really good about these people or you find really good about this culture, and take a deep breath and go back read it, because don't write one sentence. No, I'm saying like write an essay, write a whole essay, describe everything, and then go back, read it, and circle the parts that you think might be over exaggerated or that you think might be because of your own perception. And something that it takes a lot of time to do, because you're writing down an essay, and don't speak it, write it down. Genuinely, you need it in paper for you to realize how stupid you sound. And it's something that I've done twice only. And every time I go back to read it, I cringe by how stupid I sound. And it does help. It does help. Bringing your prejudice into awareness, your biases into awareness, does help with you combating it. And you got this, guys. I believe in you. We can all strive to be free of biases.
Yes, or at least just challenge them and try to confront them when they do come up, because I think it's really, really hard to be like completely judgment free. I think that's an actually an unrealistic expectation to just be like, oh, like I'm just non-judgmental. I don't judge people.
Mhm.
Like, what do you mean? Like, you're a human being. You judge everything you see through your own world lens, how you were raised, what experiences you have. All of like those experiences make you see the world in a certain way. And so you can't be judgment free. Like
Yeah,
you're
you
not a
can't,
camera, you're not a
exactly.
robot. So it's okay to acknowledge that we all have judgments, but it's like if they're problematic, if they make us see things in a skewed way that may be negatively impacting our experience, like that's when we need to confront them and do the work, like you just said. But whether it's writing an essay, um, whether that's doing more research, educating ourselves, and I think what you said is a good tip. Like, really getting out your thoughts, seeing them for what they are, and like having them out in the world, I think is really helpful. So they're not like, because I think when we're just thinking our thoughts, it's really hard to analyze them sometimes. But when they're on paper, you could really see them in a more objective way and really critique them better. And I think also to add to that exercise, if you guys want to write the essay, is to like research things that contradict your beliefs, because for every perception that you have, like there's always going to be something that will challenge it. And I think to have like two sides of like a belief you have is really, really beneficial, to see that there's not just one way to like view the world.
100% I agree with
Yeah.
that. I think we do need to do more research as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm saying
And
this to myself as well. I do need to
yes,
do more research
exactly.
about
Like
a
I
lot
feel
of
like
things.
having this conversation is like a form of education for me,
Hmm.
because just like we're constantly evolving as human beings. Again, like we're just all on this journey of trying to become better versions of ourselves. We're not born knowing everything, knowing what we're supposed to. And so talking about this with you, Karen, is helping me like analyze some things that I do or think. So thank you for having this
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you as well.
And
Truly, it
thank
does
you all
bring
for
my thoughts to
listening.
challenge. Yeah. I swear, every time I talk to you, I learn something new. It's very intriguing, honestly.
Thank you. And thank you for your time again. I really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, let us know what your thoughts are on this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Gotta Case Wanderlust podcast. Again, my name is Lydia, and you could find me on social media in the About section of this podcast. Please rate and review if you found value or insight from this, and I hope to see you in the next episode.